Hello everyone, Ben here, and welcome to, sorry, wrong map, a video that is about 2.5 hours in the making. I spent the past couple of hours doing some math to figure out some trend lines and that stuff, and to show you the trends from each state. I said I was going to do this since 1980, and that's what I decided to do. So first, we have this map, which shows the trend since 1980, where each state has been going since 1980. You'll see that Utah, Michigan, and Maine vote much like they did in 1980. Same with Rhode Island, actually, which I find pretty interesting. Now, this 1980 was, of course, Jimmy Carter versus Ronald Reagan. So it's a little different because Carter outperformed where most Democrats would in the Deep South in this area. And some of these states are moving in certain directions. Of course, this shows the West's massive swing towards the Democrats, which I think everybody knows about, especially the coast. New Mexico, Nevada, and Colorado, of course, are also famous examples. Nebraska is kind of this weird outlier. But since then, of course, we all remember the Democrats used to perform extremely well up here. This shows that the Republicans have been improving. Like I've always said since I started doing predictions on this channel, that the Rust Belt in this area is moving towards the Republicans, and it is. At least that since 1980, okay? And I've got another map, two maps here. This one we're going to go through something, and I'll get to that when I get there. But of course we also see the Northeast moving massively towards the Democrats, which is also something that was known. And of course, like I said, the Deep South moving towards the Republicans, which is also something that was a relatively known effect. And just so you can understand, for both this map and this map, this is the darkest shade of each color is any state that moved towards the Republicans or Democrats, towards that party's color, by more than 10%. West Virginia being the big mover for the Republicans, and Hawaii being the big mover for the Democrats in both maps, surprisingly. Gold is used to indicate, I'm using to indicate any state that hasn't really changed its voting habits at all, which they actually vote much like the rest of the nation, interestingly enough. Or much like they did, at that time, period. Or there hasn't been a real change in their movement since that time frame. The next darkest shade, this color like Missouri or Colorado or New York, that indicates they've moved towards that particular party by between 5 and 10%. And of course the lightest shade is under 5 but greater than 0. Okay, so this is since 1980. And here, this map is since the year 2000. There are some very weird stuff. By the way, this is only 1 point over 5 elections. There were 10 elections in the 1981, okay? So this is 5 elections. So don't be confused by this. As we can see, the South is starting to swing towards the Democrats again. This area is kind of moving towards the Democrats, but slow. Well, Texas is shifting rapidly since the year 2000. California is slowed. These states have kind of slowed up in their shift. Montana is weirdly shifted. The Rust Belt, again, like I've said, it's moving towards the Democrats. Interestingly, the Northeast has stopped moving towards the Democrats. and is in some places shifted back towards going towards the Republicans. But again, these are very small amounts. Rhode Island is actually 6, but Connecticut's 1. I find it interesting that Rhode Island is shifted towards the Republicans. Now, the way I found this out is I took the national popular vote from the 1980, 2000, 2016 elections, and I looked at who won that state, and I compared it to how much of the vote they got nationally to get a margin. So in 1980, if the Republican won a state and he got, say, 60% of the vote, I would write R plus 10, and I would compare it to how they did in 2016. And if they won it in 2000 by 5 points, let's say they got 50% of the vote, I would write R plus 3 for that year, right by the state, and I kept a tab. I wrote it out by hand. And then I compared it to how that party did in 2016 to see how much it shifted. So if they got, say, the Republican again got 50%, that'd be R plus 4. So it would have shifted towards the Republicans from the year 2000, but shifted towards the Democrats since the year 1980. And that's kind of how I got this. And then I only used the short-term trend for what I'm going to do. Sorry about that. Anyway, and then I'm going to, and then what I did is I divided the short term by 5 to see if there would be to get where I expect it for the next election, 2020. How much more they're going to vote for each party than the nation as a whole. And I decided to, and I looked at where they got, and I assume we're going to get an election similar to 2016, which is extremely competitive, very close, with a similar margin, except I'm giving Trump a bonus point for being an incumbent, which I also calculated that out, and it turned out to be inconclusive, but that's because HW lost so massively, which can be attributed to a few factors. Number one, Clinton's strength relative to George W. Bush, the economy not doing super well, and Ross Perot being a third-party candidate who took 20% of the national vote. So I kind of sort of weighed that, but I also didn't weigh it super heavily. So I'm giving just 1 bonus point for incumbency. And I'm giving a bonus point to Trump due to how well the economy is doing. And I don't want to hear anybody saying, oh, the economy is doing poorly. Look at the markets. They've been closing at record highs since he was elected, almost constantly. Every quarter is posting tremendous growth. It's like the official numbers, I think, are GDP has grown about 3.5%, which is pretty good. That's about where we normally would want it to be in a growth period. The stock market's growing at a much higher rate, especially in the industrial sector, but I'm just going to give him 1 bonus point. If it does any better than it is, I may give him 2, but I'm only going to give him 1. So I expect a 50-50 election. And I'm just going to count 2 parties. I'm not going to count third parties, which I would expect to get 2% of the vote each year. So 49-49, right? But I'm only going to do 2-party vote, so 50-50. It's a 50-50 election, okay? And this will show us whether or not Trump should be considered to have an advantage in 2020, okay? And I'm going to double each margin to see. Yeah, I'm going to double each margin because if they vote for one candidate in a 50-50 election by 4 points more than the rest of the nation, that means that the margin would be 8, okay, because 4 times 2 is 8. The votes have to come from somewhere, right? You can't just manufacture votes. I wish. Anyway, so Alabama, that's going to be a solid red state, voting 17 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. Alaska, 4 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. So that's, Alaska could be considered a battleground state depending on the candidate. Arkansas, 16 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. Arizona, 6 points more. That actually puts it out of range for the Democrats. Sort of, but not really. Okay? California, Democrats get their first, chunk. And that's going to be 14 points more Democrat than the nation as a whole. Colorado, 4 points more Democrat than the nation as a whole. Battleground, but Republicans probably won't compete there. Connecticut, Democrats by 6 more than the rest of the nation, so that's out of hand for the Republicans. Republicans will not be competing in that state. Delaware, that's a 10-point mark. Democrats by 5, so just out of reach for Republicans. The District of Columbia, 42 points more Democrat than the nation as a whole. Republicans will be able to compete here. Sarcasm on that one, seriously, guys. I shouldn't need to say it, but sarcasm on that. Florida, 2 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. Still extremely competitive, still a swing state. Georgia, 6 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. Pretty much out of reach for the Democrats. Hawaii, 19 points more Democrat than the nation as a whole. That's out of hand for the Republicans. There's no way they'd compete there. Idaho is the Democrats' version of that. 15 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. Illinois, 9 points more Democrat than the nation as a whole, but still a very wide margin for Republicans to try and overcome. Indiana, 12 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. Iowa, 6 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. Kansas, 10 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. Kentucky, 17 points more Republican. Louisiana is 13 points towards the Republicans. Maine will be voting like the nation as a whole. And we can actually determine, we can actually go ahead and say that the districts go this way, but we don't know where this will be. And there's no long or short-term trend I can ascribe to either, so it's just going to be this is a toss-up, but we know what the districts are going to do. Maryland, 13 points towards the Democrats. I wonder if that came as a surprise. Massachusetts is 12 points more Democrat than the nation as a whole. Michigan, 2 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. Swing state still, but surprisingly, it has been going towards the Republicans. Minnesota, slightly more Republican than it was last year, but it was essentially the way it voted. So it's going to be a true toss-up. Mississippi, Republican by 11, sorry. Same with Missouri. Montana, 9 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. Nebraska at 12 points means it's completely not competitive. Nevada, slightly more Democrat than it was, but it was much like the nation as a whole. New Hampshire, 2 points more Republican. It's going to be a toss-up regardless of what happens. New Jersey, Democrat by 7, which is way out of hand for the Republicans. New Mexico, same thing. New York, Democrat by 11. North Carolina, Republican by 2. North Dakota, Republican 18. Ohio is Republican 5, which just barely puts it out of reach for the Democrats. Oklahoma by 20 for the Republicans, so that's not too much of a surprise, to be honest with you. Oregon, Democrat by 2, which is a little surprising, to be honest with you. Though it's going to be a battleground, don't expect it to be this competitive, okay? That's just where my math is putting it. My brain tells me it's going to be farther apart. Pennsylvania will be Republican by 3. Wow. I expected it to be closer than that, but that's just very strange that it wound up being like that. Again, don't expect it to be that big of a margin for the Republicans. It's going to be more competitive, a lot more competitive than that. Rhode Island, Democrat by 5. That puts it completely out of reach for the Republicans. South Carolina, Republican by 8. South Dakota, Republican 15. Tennessee is Republican by 16. Texas, Republican by 5, just barely putting it out of the reach of the Democrats. Utah, Republican by 21. Vermont, Democrat by 9. That puts it essentially out of reach. Actually, it does put it way out of reach. Virginia, Democrat by 2. Washington, Democrat by 4. I expected to be a little bit wider margin than that, but okay, whatever. West Virginia, Republican by 24. So that's way out of reach. Wisconsin, Republican by 1. And Wyoming, Republican by 22. It's actually fairly interesting. It's essentially the 2016 map with Nevada, Minnesota, and Maine's 2 as true toss-ups. So, not really many gains for the Republicans electoral college-wise. And it's going to be a coin flip whether or not any of these 3 flip from 2016. Now, this is just a good baseline, and this is just based off of pure math, but it's interesting to note that we got a pretty accurate map if we're looking at what the swing states are, because most people would consider the swing states to be Washington, Oregon, battleground states, not swing states. These are not swingy in the slightest, and they're almost essentially just pure Democrat states. They're not even, at this point I wouldn't even consider them, but for a long time they were considered battleground states. Washington, Oregon, but I'm going to say, no, let's not. So, the battleground states, we got a fairly accurate map if we ignore, this is an outlier and this is a bit of an outlier because Alaska isn't really considered battleground. Nevada, Colorado, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, New Hampshire. I mean, those are the normal ones considered. That said, there are a few that should be considered battlegrounds that aren't, according to this. Arizona, Georgia, Ohio, Iowa. But it's not that surprising, to be honest with you. This map is honestly kind of what I anticipated it being. Except for, I thought this would be gold along with these two. I thought these three would be gold along with all three of these. But hey, this is almost the exact match of 2016, which I think is pretty good. An election a Republican won against a Democrat, compared to the most recent one, and that's why I kind of chose it. So for the next election, I'm going to use the elections where there were no incumbents as my jumping off point, so 2016 and 2000. Those are the ones I'm going to use for 2024, where we have no incumbent, provided Trump wins like I somewhat expect him to in 2020. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this rather long video, but this is kind of my Trump versus a generic Democrat prediction based purely off of the voting patterns since 2000. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Have a nice day. I'll see you next time when I cover my next 2018 Senate video. Bye.